The dress hit the lobby floor before Lena even had time to reach for it. It had been folded neatly in her overnight bag. A navy wrap dress she'd bought on sale at a Holt Renfrew in downtown Toronto 3 years ago, the kind of thing she wore to board dinners when she didn't want to look like she was trying too hard. But Gareth's mother, Constance Albright Harrow, had pulled it from the bag herself, held it at arm's length like it was something she'd found in a parking lot, and dropped it over the second-floor railing of the Albright family's Muskoka cottage. It landed on the hardwood below with a sound that was too quiet for what it meant. Lena Vale Albright, 36 years old, stood at the top of the staircase and watched it fall. She didn't move to pick it up. She didn't say anything. She just looked at Constance, who had already turned away and was walking back toward the sunroom, adjusting the cuffs of her linen blazer as if she'd done nothing more significant than toss out a flyer. Gareth was on the back deck. Lena had seen him through the glass before all of this started, standing with a glass of something amber in his hand, laughing at something his brother Callum said. He hadn't seen what his mother just did, or maybe he had. Either way, he didn't come inside. Lena walked down the stairs, picked up the dress, and went to put it back in her bag. Her hands were steady. That was the part that surprised her most. She and Gareth had been married for 4 years. They had met at a charity auction for sick kids in Toronto. She'd outbid him on a wine-tasting weekend in Niagara-on-the-Lake, and he'd laughed and said she had better taste than he did. He was charming then. He was still charming most of the time. The problem was that charm, she'd come to understand, was the thing he used when he needed something. When he didn't need anything from you, it went away. The Albright family ran a chain of boutique hotels across Ontario and Quebec, 6 properties when Lena had married into the family, 7 now. Gareth's father, Warren Albright Harrow, 71 years old and still working, was the one who had built the brand from a single inn in Prince Edward County into what it had become. Constance managed the aesthetics, the interiors, the branding, the way the Albright name looked on paper, and Gareth, as the eldest son, had been brought in 4 years ago to lead the expansion into Western Canada. None of them knew that the woman Gareth had married was the silent majority shareholder of the development firm that held the land contracts for 3 of those planned Western properties. Lena hadn't hidden it. She simply hadn't volunteered it. She was the kind of person who let things become clear on their own timeline. The cottage weekend had been Constance's idea, a family gathering, she'd called it. Gareth's parents, Callum and his girlfriend Faye, and Gareth and Lena. 4 days in August, the kind of August that makes you understand why people live in Canada. The lake was still and green, the mornings smelled like cedar and cold water, and by day 2 it had become apparent that Constance had not invited Lena to enjoy any of it. The comments started small. A remark about the wine Lena had brought. "We usually do a Burgundy here." A question about where exactly Lena's family was from in Alberta, delivered with the tone of someone asking about a medical condition. At dinner on the second night, Constance had interrupted Lena twice mid-sentence to direct questions to Faye, as if Lena's voice had developed a frequency only dogs could hear. Gareth ate his salmon and refilled his glass. On the third morning, Lena overheard the conversation she was never meant to hear. She'd gotten up early. She was always an early riser. Another thing Constance had once described as a bit relentless, and had taken her coffee out to the dock. She came back through the side garden, and the kitchen window was open. And Constance's voice carried in the way voices do when people feel safe in their own homes. "She's just not what this family needs right now," Constance was saying. "Gareth has a future here, real responsibilities. The Western expansion is going to define the next decade of this business, and he needs a partner who understands what that means. Who fits." There was a pause. Then Warren's voice, "She seems capable enough." Capable. Constance said the word like it tasted off. "Warren, she works in real estate development. She doesn't come from anything. She has no idea what it took to build this family, and frankly, I'm not sure she wants to learn." Lena stood in the garden with her coffee going cold and let the words arrange themselves in the order they needed to. She went back inside. She smiled at breakfast. She helped clear the dishes. That afternoon, Constance dropped the dress. That evening, Gareth came to find Lena sitting on the dock as the sun went down. She heard him coming, his footsteps on the boards, the way he cleared his throat before anything difficult. She knew all his sounds by then. 4 years will do that. He sat beside her and looked at the water for a while before he said anything. "My mother can be a lot," he said finally. Lena didn't answer. "She means well. It's just, this family has always had a certain way of doing things." She threw my dress over the railing, Gareth. He was quiet for a moment. She was probably just. She has strong feelings about clutter. The word clutter landed somewhere in Lena's chest and stayed there. She looked at him then, really looked at him, at the way he was staring at the lake instead of at her, at the slight tension around his jaw, That meant he had already decided what he was going to say and had come out here not to have a conversation, but to deliver something and leave. She had seen that expression before. She hadn't wanted to name it until now. "Okay," she said. He seemed relieved. He squeezed her hand, kissed her temple, and went back up to the cottage. 30 seconds later, she could hear him laughing again on the deck with Callum. Lena sat on the dock until it was fully dark. She thought about a lot of things, sitting there. She thought about the first time she'd met his family, Christmas at this same cottage the year after they married, and how Constance had asked her, in front of everyone, whether she and Gareth were being smart about the future, by which she meant children, by which she meant a particular kind of life. She thought about how Gareth had laughed it off. She thought about the second Christmas and the third, and how each year Constance's questions had gotten a little more pointed, and Gareth's laughing them off had taken a little more effort, and by the fourth year he wasn't laughing anymore, he was just looking at his plate. She thought about a piece of land north of Calgary. Her company, Vale Land Holdings, registered in Alberta, incorporated before she'd ever met Gareth Albright, controlled the development rights to 240 acres of commercial property in 3 Western Canadian municipalities. The Albright Hotel Group's expansion depended on site access in 2 of those municipalities. The contracts had been under negotiation for 11 months. Gareth managed the expansion file. His legal team had been corresponding with her legal team for nearly a year. Neither her lawyers nor his lawyers had thought to mention that the parties were married to each other. This was less remarkable than it sounded. Lena kept her professional and personal lives in clean, separate rooms. She had a different last name on her corporate registration. She had incorporated under Vale, her mother's maiden name, long before she took Gareth's. And she had not at any point seen a reason to raise it. She went back to Toronto the next morning, a day earlier than planned. She told Gareth she had a work obligation. He didn't ask what it was. The following 3 weeks unfolded quietly, in the way that things do when a decision has been made but not yet spoken aloud. Lena went to work. She reviewed the latest correspondence from the Albright legal team, a proposed amendment to the Eastern Calgary Parcel Agreement. She had her lawyer respond with a counter. She attended a community planning meeting in Airdrie. She ran along the waterfront on Saturdays. She also, during those 3 weeks, spoke to a family lawyer. Not because she'd decided anything, because she wanted to understand her options clearly before she decided anything. She had always operated that way. Information first, then decision. It was one of the things Constance had probably found relentless. The conversation she'd heard through the kitchen window kept coming back to her in pieces. Not the cruelty of it. She'd encountered cruelty before. It was the thing Warren had said. She seems capable enough. And the speed with which Constance had swatted it away, capable, like it was the most ordinary dismissal in the world. She thought about what capable had cost her. The years before Gareth, building Vale Land Holdings from a one-person operation, running out of a rented desk in Calgary, learning land use policy and municipal zoning and environmental assessment the way some people learn a second language, by being submerged until it became natural. The first major contract she'd closed, which she'd driven 8 hours to negotiate in person because she couldn't afford to fly. The slow accumulation of equity and leverage and reputation that had eventually made her, by any reasonable measure, one of the more significant private landholders in Western Canada. Capable, yes, among other things. Gareth called on a Wednesday evening in September. He was in Vancouver, site visit for the expansion. He sounded tired, a little distracted, and he told her he needed to talk to her when he got back. She said, of course. He came home on Friday afternoon. He put his bag down in the hallway and did not come to find her for almost 20 minutes, which was long enough for her to understand what kind of conversation this was going to be. When he came into the kitchen, he was holding something. She recognized it before she could fully see it, a manila envelope, the kind that comes from a legal office. I've been doing a lot of thinking, he said. She turned off the burner under the pot she'd been watching and gave him her full attention. He talked for a while, about how they'd grown apart, about how the pressures of the expansion had changed him, about how he'd realized over the past few months that he wasn't sure they were right for each other. He used phrases like different paths and want different things and hope we can be mature about this. He was not cruel about it. He had clearly rehearsed. At the end, he put the envelope on the counter between them and said that his lawyer had drawn up separation papers. He said he hoped she would take her time reviewing them and that there was no pressure. She looked at the envelope. She looked at him. Are you happy, Gareth? He blinked. I think I will be, he said. Eventually, she nodded slowly. Okay, you don't have anything to say? I'll have my lawyer look at these. He stood there for a moment as if he'd expected something different. Then he picked up his bag from the hallway and went to stay at Callum's. She made herself dinner. She ate it at the kitchen island because the dining table had been his idea, and she had never quite liked it. Then she called her lawyer and told him to review the separation agreement and also to prepare a letter. The letter went to the Albright Hotel Group's legal team 2 weeks later. It was professional, clear, and thorough. It outlined in plain language that Vale Land Holdings would be exercising a clause in the existing framework agreement that allowed for contract termination in the event of a material change in the principal relationship between the negotiating parties. It noted that the recent dissolution of the marital relationship between Gareth Albright Harrow and Lena Vale constituted such a material change. It stated that Vale Land Holdings would be suspending active negotiations on all 3 western parcels pending a full review, which would take no fewer than 90 days. It was signed by her lawyer. It landed in the Albright legal team's inbox on a Tuesday morning. By Wednesday morning, Warren Albright Harrow knew. By Thursday, Constance knew and had apparently required a 20-minute sit-down in the sunroom to absorb the information. By Friday, Gareth knew, and he called Lena 4 times before noon. She was in a site meeting in Cochrane when the calls came in. She saw them. She finished the meeting. She called him back at 3:30. Lena, his voice was different now, stripped of the rehearsed quality, a little rough around the edges. Is this because of us? Because of the separation? The letter explains the basis for the decision. I know what the letter says. I'm asking you directly. She thought about how to answer that. I'm asking my team to do a full review of the file, she said. That's standard practice when the circumstances around a contract change significantly. Lena, a pause. You own Vale Land Holdings. I do. Why didn't you ever say anything? She looked out the window of her truck at a field that had once been a grain operation and would eventually, if the zoning came through, be something else entirely. It never came up, she said. He was quiet for a long time. My father is talking about delaying the entire western expansion. 3 years of planning. I understand that must be difficult. Is there a way to... The review process takes 90 days, Gareth. My team will be in touch. She ended the call. She sat in the truck for a few more minutes, watching the field. She didn't feel triumphant. She had learned a long time ago that there wasn't much satisfaction in watching something fall apart. The feeling people expected you to have was usually quieter and more complicated than they imagined. What she mostly felt was tired and clear. The way you feel after a long project reaches its natural conclusion. The following weeks were instructive. Warren Albright Harrow requested a direct meeting, which her lawyer declined on her behalf. The Albright Group's PR team put out a statement about operational adjustments to the expansion timeline, which was the kind of language that fools no one in the industry. 2 of the 3 western site options were in municipalities where Vale Land Holdings had existing relationships with the planning departments, relationships that had taken years to build and that existed entirely independently of anything to do with the Albright family. Gareth's brother Callum sent Lena a text message that said simply that was ruthless. She didn't respond. Constance Albright Harrow said nothing, which was Lena had come to understand, how Constance operated when there was nothing left to say. The separation was finalized in early November, in the clean and unremarkable way that legal processes conclude when both parties have competent representation and neither is interested in drama. Lena signed the papers in her lawyer's office on a grey Tuesday afternoon. Outside the window, the first real snow of the season was coming down over the city, heavy and serious, the kind that stays. She walked back to her car alone. She thought about the dress on the lobby floor, the sound it had made when it landed, how she had walked down the stairs and picked it up without saying anything. At the time, she hadn't fully understood what she was doing. It had felt like restraint, or maybe just exhaustion. Now she thought that maybe it had been something else. Maybe she had already known, in some quiet part of herself, that nothing she said in that moment would matter as much as what she decided later. The dress was still fine. She wore it to a meeting in Calgary 2 weeks after the separation was finalized, a meeting with a new development partner, a woman named Dorothea, who ran a pension fund out of Edmonton and had been trying to get on Lena's schedule for 6 months. They sat in a restaurant in Kensington, and Dorothea said she'd heard about the Albright situation through the industry network, and she'd been impressed by how it had been handled. Quietly, Dorothea said. That could have made a lot of noise. Noise is expensive, Lena said. Dorothea laughed. What's next for you? Lena thought about the land in Cochrane, about a new site she'd been looking at outside Kelowna, about a dozen other things running on their own timelines, their own rhythms, moving forward in the way that things do when the person managing them knows how to be patient. Same thing as always, she said. The work. The Albright Group eventually found alternative land partners in 2 of the 3 West markets, Smaller holdings, less advantageous placement, more expensive to develop. The third market they walked away from entirely. The Western expansion, which Warren had been publicly projecting for 3 years, launched 18 months behind schedule and at significantly reduced scope. Gareth stepped back from the expansion file in January. The official reason, according to a brief statement on the company's website, was a decision to refocus on core Ontario operations. Lena read about it in a business newsletter she subscribed to. She filed the newsletter in a folder she kept for industry updates. And Gareth, according to someone they'd both known before everything unraveled, a mutual friend who mentioned it once and only once, clearly unsure whether it was her place, had apparently spent several months trying to understand exactly how his wife had come to own the land his family's future depended on, and why she had never told him, and what, if anything, it said about how things had gone. Lena didn't have an answer for him. It wasn't that she was being withholding. She genuinely wasn't sure what answer would have made sense to someone who had spent 4 years sitting at the same table as her without ever once asking what she did with her days. She had been capable. That had turned out to be enough.